Picture yourself as a Roman senator strolling through the Suburra, Rome's notorious red-light quarter, when you spot a recognizable figure entertaining patrons in a dingy brothel. Your stomach drops as you notice the soft features beneath the cheap paint. This isn't just some random harlot. This is Valeria Messalina, Empress of Rome, wife of Emperor Claudius, willingly humiliating herself for the thrill of nameless encounters with the city's lowest ranks. This wasn't some helpless woman pushed into selling her body. This was the most powerful woman in the Roman Empire, slipping out of the palace at night to compete with street prostitutes, determined to prove she could outlast any rival in raw stamina. Think you already know Roman vice? What you're about to hear about Messalina will make Caligula seem like an altar boy. Because Rome's third empress didn't just misuse her position, she turned her sexuality into a weapon that terrified an empire and ultimately sealed her own gruesome downfall. In 38 CE, Rome rejoiced in what looked like the perfect imperial marriage. Valeria Messalina, scarcely 15 years old, wed Emperor Claudius in a ceremony symbolizing everything Romans prized: nobility, fertility, and the continuation of sacred bloodlines. She was everything an empress was expected to be. Young, radiant, from an ancient patrician clan, and able to provide the empire with legitimate successors. Claudius, 13 years older and physically impaired by what modern doctors identify as cerebral palsy, seemed thankful to have secured such treasure. Ancient sources describe Messalina as possessing timeless Roman beauty, pale complexion, golden hair, and the refined features marking aristocratic descent. She carried out her imperial role flawlessly, giving Claudius 2 children and attending state events with proper dignity. Roman culture ran on strict moral codes dividing women into fixed classes. Respectable wives and mothers stood at the top, while prostitutes and performers lived at the bottom of society. An empress was expected to embody feminine purity so absolutely that even whispers of misconduct could shake the government. The gap between public ideals and hidden truth made Messalina's behavior not just scandalous, but truly dangerous to Rome's stability. But behind the marble corridors of the Palatine Palace, something much darker was forming. The girl who smiled sweetly during rituals and hosted polished banquets was secretly preparing nighttime escapades that shocked even jaded Roman nobles who thought they had witnessed every indulgence possible. The change started subtly during Messalina's first year as empress, when palace staff noticed strange shifts in her conduct. She would dismiss her guards at odd hours, saying she was tired, then slip from her chambers dressed in plain clothes that disguised her rank. At first, her late-night outings seemed like harmless rebellion, a teenager craving adventure beyond the suffocating rules of palace life. But Messalina's midnight forays quickly turned from innocent escape into something much more planned and unsettling. She began examining the habits of Rome's prostitutes, studying their methods, their territories, and their customers. This wasn't idle watching. She was carrying out research with the strict precision of a military campaign. The first recorded episode came during the Saturnalia festival of 40 CE, when social roles temporarily reversed and usual moral limits loosened. While Claudius attended sacred rites, Messalina disguised herself as a commoner and wandered into the Suburra quarter. What began as curiosity about ordinary Romans turned into an obsession with proving her sexual dominance over seasoned entertainers. Historian Tacitus passed down hushed reports from palace informa. Nets who uncovered Messalina's secret. She had approached a brothel master, offering to work under disguise for one night. The owner, unaware of who she truly was, accepted what looked like a noblewoman seeking thrills. Yet Messalina's showing that night surpassed anything the house had ever seen. She took on more patrons than their most skilled workers, revealing a hunger that shocked even veterans used to extreme demands. When dawn came and others stopped, Messalina wouldn't quit. She begged for more patrons, more contests, more chances to prove that an empress could outperform any ordinary prostitute. The brothel master finally forced her to leave, but the harm was already done. Messalina had uncovered her true obsession. Within months of that first brothel night, Messalina developed a methodical system for her midnight ventures that revealed the calculating mind beneath her apparent madness. She built a circle of loyal servants who smuggled her out of the palace, arranged disguises that completely altered her look, and created fake names that let her move freely through Rome's hidden sexual economy. But ordinary prostitution wasn't enough to feed Messalina's competitive streak. She started setting up contests between herself and Rome's most famous courtesans, betting huge sums on her ability to take on more clients in a single night than any professional. These matches weren't private. They drew crowds of wealthy Romans who came to watch their empress degrade herself for amusement. The most notorious of these battles happened in 41 CE, when Messalina challenged Scylla, Rome's most celebrated prostitute, to a test of endurance. The rules were simple. Whoever could serve the most men from dusk till dawn would win a fortune in gold. Roman elites packed the venue, gambling heavily as they watched their emperor's wife compete like a gladiator in an arena of flesh. Scylla, a veteran with years of training, paced herself wisely through the night. She used practiced methods for handling clients efficiently while saving her stamina for the long contest ahead. By sunrise, she had been with 25 men and declared herself exhausted yet triumphant. Messalina was only beginning. Even after Scylla surrendered, the empress kept taking new partners, driven by a need that went far beyond simple lust. Ancient records suggest she ultimately entertained more than 30 men that night, stopping only when no others remained. Her victory wasn't celebrated. It was met with horrified silence by Romans who realized they were witnessing something unprecedented and deeply unsettling. The psychological weight was immense. This wasn't a desperate woman trapped in degrading circumstances. This was the most powerful woman alive, choosing shame as her sport. Messalina discovered her imperial rank made humiliation more exciting, not less. The sharper the contrast between her public respect and private degradation, the greater her pleasure became. But those public challenges were just the start of Messalina's slide into planned corruption that would one day threaten the stability of the Roman state. And if you think Messalina's prostitution contests were shocking, you're not ready for what followed when she decided to make her obsessions permanent. What I'm about to reveal makes everything you've just heard seem like playful rebellion compared to the organized machine she was building. Before we step into the darkest part, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button if you're ready for what's next, and drop a comment below to tell me where you're watching from. It's amazing that people across the globe share the same curiosity about the darkest corners of history. The next stage would turn Rome's empress into something far more threatening than a sexual rival. In 42 CE, Messalina crossed a line that changed her from scandalous ruler into an outright danger to imperial security. She founded what historians later called the boldest criminal scheme in Roman history, a luxury brothel under imperial shield, staffed by high-born women and catering to the city's most powerful men. The business was hidden in plain sight inside a lavish villa near the Campus Martius, disguised as a private club for Rome's elite gatherings. Messalina used her imperial authority to force recruits, blackmailing noblewomen into joining her house under threat of financial collapse or political ruin for their kin. What looked like willing involvement was really coercion backed by the full weight of the throne. Messalina's twisted genius lay in her choice of clientele. Instead of serving random patrons like streetwalkers, she specifically targeted senators, generals, and wealthy traders who carried knowledge useful to imperial interests. Each encounter was logged by hidden attendants who noted conversations, tracked weaknesses, and collected intelligence that Messalina could later exploit for political leverage. The empress had essentially built a honey trap scheme that made her one of the most informed people in the Roman Empire. She knew which senators planned to resist imperial directives, which generals carried treasonous ambitions, and which traders dodged taxes or smuggled contraband. This intelligence web gave Messalina unmatched influence over the very men who were supposed to govern the empire alongside her husband. Her strategies were sophisticated and psychologically brutal. She would spot targets through close observation at public functions, then arrange for them to receive invitations to exclusive gatherings at her villa. Once inside, guests were offered increasingly unusual entertainments, climaxing in encounters with noble-born women whose identities were revealed only after compromising acts had been carried out and recorded. The psychological toll on her victims was precise and merciless. Realizing they had unknowingly laying with the Empress herself or with wives and daughters of their political allies, created tangled layers of blackmail that guaranteed silence and obedience. Messalina had twisted sexual disgrace into political dominance, weaving a net of compromised leaders who dared not resist her will. But the most chilling part of her operation was how it corrupted the very bonds that sustained Roman life. She forced patrician women to betray their own class, pressured statesmen to abandon their values, and turned sacred ties of marriage and kinship into weapons of manipulation and control. Foreign envoys began noting strange shifts in Roman policy that seemed to benefit certain figures without clear justification. Military commands fell to unqualified men who somehow held the empress's endorsement. Trade deals favored merchants with no visible imperial link. The empire's machinery of decision-making had been quietly hijacked by a brothel mistress who just happened to be the emperor's wife. Yet even this organized corruption paled beside what came when Messalina decided secrecy was no longer thrilling. By 44 CE, her hunger for both power and depravity had grown far beyond what clandestine schemes could deliver. She began staging massive public orgies that doubled as entertainment and political theater, forcing Rome's elite into degrading spectacles that cemented her grip on the empire's ruling class. These weren't casual feasts, but carefully crafted demonstrations of imperial dominance disguised as sacred festivals. Messalina would claim she was honoring gods and goddesses, demanding attendance from senators, their spouses, and other leading officials under the pretense of civic duty. What began as solemn rites slowly morphed into scenes of orchestrated sexual degradation. The empress had perfected methods for escalating these gatherings from respectable ceremonies into something far darker. She would start with traditional offerings, then slip in increasingly intimate elements justified as ancient ritual. By the time attendees realized the truth, they were already trapped, too compromised to object without admitting their role in acts that shattered Roman ideals. Messalina's skill at psychological control reached its peak during these spectacles. She understood that forcing patrician men and women to debase themselves in public forged bonds of collective shame that kept them from challenging her later. Everyone who took part became complicit in pretending these festivals were holy observances instead of imperial sex performances. The most harrowing reports describe Messalina compelling political enemies to perform with one another as she watched and gave mocking commentary. Senators who once resisted imperial decrees stood naked and disgraced before their peers, their honor destroyed and their authority permanently broken. She discovered that sexual humiliation was more effective than execution for eliminating rivals. Yet perhaps the darkest element was how Messalina began drawing younger participants into these spectacles. Palace records imply she enlisted adolescent sons and daughters of Rome's nobility, insisting their presence was required for religious authenticity. These youths, raised to obey imperial command without question, became unwilling subjects in their own exploitation. The empress had built a system where resisting her meant admitting involvement in acts that could destroy entire family lines. Parents couldn't shield their children without confessing their own part. Politicians couldn't expose her crimes without revealing their own guilt. She had essentially made herself untouchable through organized blackmail that ensnared Rome's entire ruling elite. Foreign envoys began noting the odd behavior of Roman officials during diplomatic talks. Once confident senators now looked nervous and submissive. Military commanders appeared distracted and uneasy. The empire's leadership had been mentally broken by an empress who understood that sexual disgrace was more powerful than armed force in shaping human behavior. In 48 CE, Messalina's hunger for influence and scandal reached its peak when she carried out an act so shocking it stunned even Romans used to imperial depravity. While Emperor Claudius was away in Ostia supervising grain deliveries, Messalina staged a full wedding with Gaius Silius, a striking young senator she had pursued for months. This wasn't some hidden romance or symbolic rite. It was a legal Roman marriage complete with sacred ceremonies, official witnesses, and signed contracts. Messalina had essentially proclaimed herself divorced from Claudius and remarried another man while still holding the crown of empress. The legal and political fallout was staggering, since Roman law accepted her new marriage as binding while she still remained Claudius's wife. The wedding feast turned into a days-long orgy that drew much of Rome's last uncorrupted nobility. finally forcing even her most compromised allies to admit that Messalina had stepped into open rebellion against imperial rule. She no longer pretended her actions were private indulgence or sacred ritual. This was a direct strike against the emperor's authority and the empire's survival itself. Messalina's mental state at this stage suggests total break from reality. She began calling Silius emperor and herself his consort, apparently believing she could replace Claudius by sheer will and the obedience of those she blackmailed. She even started issuing commands under Silius's name and arranging a formal coronation that would legitimize their reign. The young senator, at first flattered by her devotion, soon found himself trapped in a nightmare of imperial ambition and sexual obsession. He had become the centerpiece of Messalina's ultimate fantasy, not just erotic conquest, but complete political reshaping of Rome under her warped vision. Ancient writers suggest he began planning escapes, realizing too late he was only a pawn in her lethal scheme. Meanwhile, Claudius remained ignorant of his wife's marriage until loyal freedmen risked their lives to warn him of the crisis. The emperor's first response was disbelief. Even for Messalina, marrying another man while empress seemed unthinkable. But as evidence grew, witnesses, contracts, documents, Claudius realized he faced not only betrayal but possible civil war. The clash came swiftly and mercilessly. Claudius marched back to Rome with loyal troops and confronted Messalina in the gardens where she was celebrating her union. Ancient sources describe her final moments as a storm of pride and panic. She realized her net of blackmail and sexual power had finally met something stronger than shame: imperial survival. Messalina's execution was immediate, but her erasure was thorough. Claudius commanded her name be struck from monuments, her portraits destroyed, and her memory cursed through damnatio memoriae. Official forgetting made speaking her name treason. The empress who had used lust to dominate an empire was herself crushed by the empire's ultimate tool: state power. Her downfall ended an age when sexual scandal nearly replaced political skill as the engine of imperial rule. If this glimpse into power's darkest edge left you wondering what other hidden truths lurk in history's shadows, click the video now on your screen to uncover another shocking tale authorities tried to erase. Subscribe to keep exploring the terrifying realities buried beneath civilization's most polished lies.